All right, the recording has begun. So, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, as it may sound comfortable to everyone. My name is Abhivardhan. You know me, I'm a technology law specialist and consultant. I'm also the chairperson of the Indian Society of AI and Law, a mini industry forum where we engage with enthusiasts and professionals in the field of law policy and technology. Although today is a very special session in a way that we have specialists from international relations, because today is a discussion on the strategic implications of artificial intelligence in two fields, which is to say geopolitics and geoeconomics. Now, why does this discussion become important? And before we go into that, let me introduce the specialists who we have and the chair of the session today. We have Mr. Mohammed Soliman, a very respected person. He's also a part of the distinguished ISAIL Advisory Council. He is the Director of Strategic Technologies and Cybersecurity Program at the Middle East Institute. Just recently, he had testified for an interesting briefing to the U.S.-China Commission. I hope you follow him on This is Soliman on Twitter, X, however it's the name. Do go through his articles and insights and his work on the Indo-Abrahamic as well as on strategic aspects of U.S.-Saudi cooperation or U.S.-Arab countries cooperation when it comes to technology policy. So he's a very interesting person, and I'm sure that you would like the conversations and the discourses that he's contributing to. We also have specialists from the Takshashila institution. We welcome them uh, with happiness and I would say honor. Uh, as we are having the specialists, let me also introduce them quickly. We had one specialist who was going to join, Mr. Ish Jain, who is a technology arbitration expert, a lawyer by profession. Unfortunately, he's from Mumbai. He's from Regice Legal, a very distinguished person in space law and technology law. Unfortunately, due to certain arbitration hearing that just had to be scheduled to 12, had scheduled 12 hours before he could not join, but he sends his regards to everyone. So from the Takshashila institution, we have Mr. Satya, Sahu, we have Bharat Reddy, and we have Anushka Saxena present here. Welcome all of you. We also receive regards from the chairperson of the AIGA Research Ethics Committee, under which this session is also possible, Dr. Chavi Sharma. We also have members of the Research Ethics Committee who will be intervening and adding their insights as they join later. So as this recording has begun, let me now quickly talk about the pointers as to what we should discuss today within this span of 60 minutes. So the questions, since we are a law related society, of course, international relations is something we don't discuss that much. But as somebody who has been enthused about Indo-Pacific largely and the Indo-Abrahamic now, thanks to Soliman's works, um, I thought that we should discuss a little about the strategic implications, and I think this discussion could be a great way to steer that forward. Those who will being watch this on YouTube, great. Please do share it later. That's the great thing. But yeah, the points of discussion, let me share even as notes, and let me just point that out. So there are 4 points of discussion. First is about a simple problem as to what are the specific geopolitical risks and opportunities about the advancement of AI when it comes to MSMEs and others, and the startup economy as we call it. Then another question is how might AI driven economic growth is going to reshape global trade patterns and economic alliances, which is very interesting considering the way it's happening in West Asia, larger prime Indo-Pacific, I call it, which is Asia, as we know, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and all that. Third, what are the potential impacts on AI on the labor markets? How this might affect migration patterns and international relations? That's something which we can discuss, because I remember even Soliman had raised about it in a very beautifully written article for the Middle East Institute. I think he had cited it on Twitter as well. And the fourth one is how might the integration of AI and critical infrastructure within the Indo-Pacific region may alter strategic dependencies and vulnerabilities on a global scale. So these are very practical questions and broad questions at the same time. So we'll take these questions and I think we can take this up. So I'll let first the chair, or let us say Soliman, to add his insights, maybe for 5 minutes, and then we can take any of the questions in a particular order as you wish to. I think that way we can take this up. So I think let's set up some background. So what do you think about it?
No, thanks so much for this kind of introduction, your kind words, and for the Indian Society for organizing this important panel. I think discussing AI is the right approach, thinking big, trying to make sure that we have an idea about what we're dealing with. Because even quite frankly, as an engineer, engineer by training, it's very hard for me to tell you what's the actual impact. It's very hard to see. One of the pieces I wrote recently is called "The Technological Pivot of History," meaning we are in a moment of our own moment of history where we're going through a different level of transformation, an exponential transformation of human life. When humans on Earth, and I don't want to be acting as a philosopher, but when human on Earth is starting discovered fire or discover agriculture, it took thousands of years to discover these sort of new technologies at the time. But what we're having right now is the scale and the scope of discoveries are beyond our imagination. You see that in generative AI. You see that in the parameters being used in generative AI. You see this in the integration of AI and everything. I mean, we are on a call right now when you have an AI note taker, where you have AI fully integrated in whatever commercial enterprise you're using. Apple, Microsoft, Google, you name it. Um, um, so clearly there is a major transformation taking place right now. That's number one. However, not every country will benefit, not every society will benefit. You're going to have great divergence between societies. But eventually, because eventually AI is a cluster or a combination of multiple things. Number one, of course, human talent is very important to develop these large language models and deploy them. Second, having the financial, have the cash to spend on these sort of innovation. Three, having the infrastructure without really having the connectivity infrastructure, cloud, data centers, you are falling behind. Four is basically having an approach to AI, which is not really about the capability or the talent. It's more on the policy side, having the actual framework to design and implement and integrate AI. Um, uh, This means that eventually you end up with few countries on the top when it comes to the AI food chain. United States, China, those are the two countries that stand out because they have, guess what? They have the semiconductors, they have the human talent, they have the pre-existing infrastructure, and I think you can see the divergence of what you see of that situation. But you also have other AI powers. You have UK, you have Israel, India's up and coming. You have other Asian powers, Korea and Japan and Taiwan, Israel. So clearly, there's also other countries that are trying to be part of this AI club. UAE and Saudi Arabia for sure stand out in this new framing. But that's it. You're going to have a very exclusive club of AI countries, AI powers, that somehow resembles, not in numbers, but resembles the exclusive nuclear club, right? It's not going to be a 10-country club. It's going to be more than that, 15, 20, 25. However, there are many countries that are going to be falling behind, and the divergence between people on the top and people behind is going to actually increase by time. The impact on the global balance of power is also going to be profound because this is going to have an impact on the way we're thinking about the question of power and the question of hard military power in terms of using AI for military deployment, using AI for targeting, using. So you're going to have that sort of new discourse playing in the field of geopolitics, integrating drones with a fighting fleet that's integrated with an AI chain of command. I mean, this is not really a theory or a Skynet scenario. This is something we're seeing this in Ukraine, we're seeing this in Gaza. We already have seen some of it in Nagorno-Karabakh / Syria. So this is the new norm of warfare in the AI age. And I'll stop here just to make sure that others have opportunity to share and reflect and ask and give comments.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a great exposition to start with. So I really appreciate that. Um, okay, so we already have Bharat, Satya, Anushka, and I think rest will be joining on their own. Um, so I think quick points could be added from all three of you, maybe. Maybe we can start with Anushka if she wishes to, then Satya, then Bharat. and then I think we can address the 4 points for a contextual point of view to steer it through, I think. Yeah. So Anushka, if you would like to begin, up to you, or Bharat, we can take it up to you or something. Okay.
Hi. Thanks, Abhivardhan, for the opportunity. I think I'm facing a network issue, so please pardon me for my camera. But
Sorry.
if you
Yeah.
don't mind, is there a particular set of questions that you want me to answer in whatever remarks I make?
Right. So no, so this is kind of an add up to what Soliman remarked to begin with. So some few points if you wish to, all three of you, and then we can take this up forward by you focusing the 4 points one by one, and maybe I can offer a breakdown, and then I think we can steer it. So yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Abhivardhan, for the opportunity. And it was a delight to hear what Muhammad Soliman also had to say as well. Um, I think I'd argue, just to add to the discussion that already kickstarted. My area of research is not the technical bits of AI, but necessarily the intersection of artificial intelligence and geopolitics. And I think the work that we do at Takshashila, which is largely spearheaded by Bharat and Satya, so they'll be much better suited to, answer some of the questions and contribute to the discussion. We tend to focus on charting a pathway to AI governance, which is also the theme of a research paper we've recently argued. And our goal is to basically um, take the stance in a vehement fashion that we do believe that artificial intelligence needs to be regulated. So on that question, we're pretty clear about. On that question, we're very clear. But how to do that, and what kind of a framework can countries adopt? What their key considerations should be when they think of um, pillars or verticals of the AI supply chain that they should invest in. That's something that that's a question that we try to answer. We, for example, argue that governing AI or regulating AI should be an exercise that enhances the flourishment of human society, so on and so forth. It enables interchange of information and uh, looks at the local context when it comes to use of AI tools, right? So at least that's where Takshashila comes from a perspective of governing artificial intelligence. Just on the bit about geopolitics, I'd say Mohammed Soliman has given an excellent perspective on the Middle East's contribution to the global AI ecosystem. I'd just like to say that it is indeed true that what we're observing is that in countries kind of um, in countries' efforts to become proactive players in shaping the AI ecosystem globally, there are fault lines and there are divisions in that. There are two large bins that are being created, and it seems as if ecosystems of AI governance and even proliferation of AI related tech is either being led by the United States and China, and then there is middle power support to each of their endeavors, and according to which tools and which ideological leanings suit their local contexts. And of course, in all of this, and something that Paul Shar argues as well, right? There are four key pillars that one needs to take into account to assess how countries are faring on the AI vis-a-vis the AI landscape, right? So that's data, that's talent, that's compute power, and that's institutions. And the reason why I argue that the world is being divided into these two broad bins would be because the competition between, say, the US and China is visible precisely across these four lenses, right? And that's how analysts also try and kind of assess each of their respective, let's say, strengths and weaknesses. So, they'd argue that US is the biggest puller of global talent when it comes to AI, but China would perhaps have have some kind of a disproportionate advantage when it comes to data collection, although the use of that data is very hyper localized, and so that throws up challenges of its own account. Similarly, there are vast differences in the institutions between the two sides. Ideological approach to their deployment of AI is different. And so I
Right.
think the interconnections between geopolitics and the more technical pillars of AI, these intersections come together to determine how we move forward. And of course, I don't want to throw the floor to Bharat and Satya now to maybe talk about some of our research and build on this. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so great points. So yeah, Bharat, I think you can add on more on the position on AI governance. So, I
Right.
mean, Anushka's position is that. So yeah, please.
Yeah. Thanks, Abhivardhan. Thanks for inviting us, and thanks, Mohammed Soliman. So it was great to hear your initial framing of the of how AI is important to national power and uh, the different ways in which it contributes. So we broadly agree with how you have framed the uh, that context. The way we have looked at it, right? So I'll quickly paste some of our research on this. So the way we've looked at it is again building off of what Anushka was saying, is that there are many ingredients that or inputs that go into building an AI, a complex AI system. So these could be data, compute, the models, and finally the applications. So there are a lot of entry barriers at each of these stages. So in compute, it might be access to the chips themselves. So and so semiconductors again is a pretty complex supply chain. It's distributed across the world. So you see that there's a lot of geopolitics at play in just accessing the cutting edge chips. So there have been sanctions imposed on some countries, which makes it harder for them to get access to these chips, which are necessary for training the cutting edge AI models. So that might be a way in which geopolitics is playing out in the compute layer. Then in data, you need a lot of, for large language models, for example, you need a lot of um, um, you know uh, proprietary data. You need data from crawling the web for this thing. So these are again resources that are available with big tech companies largely located in the US, which is why you have seen these big breakthroughs have coming from there. So moving on to models, you need talent, you need resources to build these systems. So uh, and finally to applications, you need some kind of a governance mechanism. So broadly what we're saying is that in each of these phases there are entry barriers, and there are a lot of companies in which these different stages that go into building AI systems are integrated. So you might find a Google having access to data, having their cloud computing services that they offer, which they might be able to leverage for this thing. So they also have access to the talent. The same with a lot of other big tech companies who are able to integrate these different parts of the supply chain and come up with a AI solution, which is harder for someone who doesn't have a strong presence in something in each of these areas to do. So that's broadly how we have tried to look at it. So how do you um, reduce these entry barriers so that you can, for a country which is not, say, the US, which is not having access to some of these building blocks, how do you create those, create competition in each of these stages is broadly what we've tried to, the way we've tried to approach this. So maybe if I'm, Satya can add to what I'm saying,
Yeah.
what I've said.
Yeah, so Anushka and Bharat have pretty much nailed the basics. So I'll just talk about the vision as to why we focus on concentration risks in the supply chain for AI as a starting point for AI governance. It's because things like ethics, safety, and other considerations will be also be second order effects if you could solve for concentration risks. If you have more democratized access to data, if you have less opaque models, let's say more open source models, if you have more access to compute, let's say cheaper access to compute, fewer companies dominating the supply chain for compute, and applications are also on a level playing field. Let's say maybe if we can leverage DPI, digital public infrastructure, to make sure all of these things are more accessible, then the moment there is more competition, the moment there is more scrutiny, ethics and safety will also be taken care of to a large extent as a natural consequence, right? Not to say that there isn't any need for a concerted effort in those areas as well. That is also what we are going to focus on as we write the second iteration of this of the paper. Moving to geopolitics specifically, as Anushka talked about, is that the intersection is becoming more blurred as we go on, simply because of this somewhat multipolar world order that's happening, primarily led by US on its allies on one end and China and some other countries on the other one. The main problem is, aside from explicit controls, like let's say the export controls that the US is levying on semiconductors on China, there will also be more implicit or less visible ways of controlling this. For instance, in February this year, the Center for New American Security and RAND Corporation came out with two papers which introduced proposals for on-chip hardware-enabled governance mechanisms. Very specific, very simply the fact that in specialized leading-edge chips, like let's say the NVIDIA H100, what will happen at the design stage itself, the US government's at the US government's behest, NVIDIA is going to basically add, let's say, a component or a chip design within the as their concretizing the architecture of it, so that in case the end user, doesn't matter if it's China or not, if the end user is going to use it for a very specific workload that can trigger a threshold that is built into the chip's design, then the chip will either brick itself or lower its capabilities on the fly. Right. So now things like these are going to raise red flags for any country. It doesn't have to be China, like because it raises questions about property rights. So export controls to prevent a particular chip from getting into the hands of a particular adversary. But in this case, but sovereignty, conceptions of sovereignty become more paramount. The fact that whatever you paid for your property, someone else is going to be able to control it, regardless of whether ownership has passed hands, is still going to be there, right? So all of these things will have, again, second order effects for startups, for companies, for businesses across the world. So geopolitics wise, it's going to become blurrier, more grayer. And yeah, so I'll leave my comments for the other questions later.
Yeah, that's great. So I think taking the mood of how things have been discussed, I think we can, shuffle the order of the 4 points, and we can actually start with a better point to begin with. And all of them are great points. Yeah, I am not on mute. So they're great points. So to take this forward, let's first discuss about reshaping global trade patterns. So I'll tell you why we came up with this point, because and I've shared one research which is not from ISAIL but from my own firm, which is on which was a feedback to a very brilliant report by Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal and others. So I've already shared that, and great links shared. In fact, Soliman's recent article was actually amazing, which he recently shared as well. So yeah, that's a great read. But moving on to the main point, when it comes to global trade patterns per se, I think in semiconductors, I think Satya rightly pointed out about the issue of export control. But let's even add something else to it. The one aspect which also comes is about the digital economy. And while compute costs, all those things matter for countries, maybe at a diplomatic level, there's also about the use of multimodal AI tools, right? You may have some tool from Israel, then you may have some tool from Greece, then you may have some tool from, I don't know, Argentina, and you're using it in India. And somehow, obviously, like India's status in the so-called multipolar world is unique. That's a different thing altogether. But at a general level, what it explains also is that the multifaceted impact is actually three-pronged. First, obviously, at the level of the semiconductor economy, which is about exports. Second is, of course, about how compute issues come in, and anything technical about the technical infrastructure of AI. And the third would be like how AI really becomes a part of digital economy in traditional and non-traditional ways. So I think we should discuss about trade and economic alliances, which could be built upon AI. There are some examples from UAE and even Saudi Arabia to understand. That's why, I had referred that article of Soliman. I've shared it as well. So, so let's start with Soliman himself. So, what do you think about it? And I think then Bharat and others can chime in. So, yeah.
So you were trying to make the point about integrating different AI systems. Am I correct?
Yep.
I mean, listen, these are ingrained conversations, and clearly there's not really a clear view about this sort of integration. What I can tell you is, at this point, there's not really a clear divergence between the different AI models being developed, because they're still using the same data sets, what we call breed data sets. So far, there's still common ground. Will this change in 2 to 3 years? I don't know, because also remember, all the large language models that we have, or AI models that were developed or released to the public, were all based on English language models that predetermined with specific parameters. The moment you have a different breakthrough from a non-English model, that could change the dynamic. So the idea that the UAE and Saudi Arabia somehow integrated within a US AI sphere, that could change in the future if they are building a different sort of large language models that's not really dependent on the US infrastructure. And of course, China, I would say, is the elephant in the room, because I don't really have personal visibility on the way they are conducting their large language models. So you do have that sort of non-English aspect of AI that will be a very dominant factor in the next, I would say, 4 to 5 years. And I don't really have a view about how this will evolve.
Great. So, Bharat, Satya, Anushka, please.
Maybe I'll just quickly chime in with a few initial thoughts. It's not something I've thought through. So um, what I'm thinking is, I don't know how well they might integrate these different systems that are trained on different data sets. So it might be large language models which are more or less having similar capabilities, like what Mohammed was just saying, or it might be AI systems which are meant for different purposes. You might have um, a large language model, you might have something of which is a more narrower specific use case related thing, for say image detection or something like that. So the integrating it and making them work together is something um, I really haven't thought through that. But um, are you talking about it in the context of integrating it to come up with new use cases, or what exactly is the idea that we're trying to explore
So,
here?
yeah, it could be about use cases which are new, or it could be existing use cases. You can use traditionally or non-traditionally, right?
Mhm.
So what happens is that, of course, you could have certain components from certain other place, and therefore there are implications. Now, I agree with the point that if the language changes when it comes to the processing models, of course, the dynamic changes completely, and of course, that creates a new diversion per se. It could happen in India as well, in its own unique ways, right? We have so many languages, and there's a whole market where some legible startups are coming up in the language processing side, including obviously Bhashani from Digital India Corporation. So that's what I tried to imply. Yeah.
Okay, so in that context, I think there will be, when you try to use models which are developed in a different context, cultural context, using data which is not representative of the local population, you will see some adoption issues. You will see that it's not working well in certain use cases. It's not, maybe it might be the language might have some issues. It might not represent certain sections of society, because they were not adequately represented in the training data. So you'll see all of these kind of issues cropping up. And again, you might some countries might be able to deal with it because they have the data locally to be able to maybe fine tune these models or address specific needs for their for themselves. But countries which don't have that kind of a data will find this gap, which might not work very well in their context. Right? So that's something that will be there. Regarding the other thing, how I interpreted it, I still don't have a very clear idea about how it would be for different kinds of AI systems to work together. That's yeah, that's still something I
No,
think it's a
yeah,
more
I,
advanced. Yeah,
I agree, and I respect that. It's just that I added it as a point from an
yeah.
aspect of trade because it could be an issue. It's just like it's an open discussion. So just keep. I hope I did not offend anyone on that. But yeah, yeah. But Satya, please.
Yeah. So for the exact reasons that Bharat mentioned, right? The fact that it's difficult to transplant models that have been trained on other data from the very get-go in other contexts, other jurisdictions, transplanting them into something like India, for instance, will not work very well. And the reason, and I think that is going to drive the proliferation of open source AI models. And I'm talking about models specifically, not necessarily applications, um, uh, because retraining, etc., will be a lot cheaper for open source models. Customizing them for a use case that is very specific to a particular region. I'm not even talking about country specific, countrywide applications. Let's say even at a district level, it may be a lot more. It's cheaper. It's easier to customize for a very specific use case. I'm still confused about why multimodal AI would be relevant for the digital economy, but in terms of reshaping global trade patterns and economic alliances, I think we'll start looking at it. We'll start seeing it affect local economies a lot more, and as the local economies become more integrated with very specific, let's say, services sector, for instance. Um, Assume there's an open source model that's been used to run the backend for, let's say, Swiggy customer service or something, food delivery customer service. Maybe that model's very specific use case is to lower language barriers. So earlier, workers who would not have been considered as potential candidates for customer service workers because of the lack of command of English will now be able to work simply because of the translation layer powered by AI. And so as that happens, we may start seeing the services sector in very specific areas expand. Maybe that also means people abroad can also join in. So maybe economies will start integrating that way, but there is no real way for us to extrapolate how it might affect jobs or economies this way. I think it's a little too early to think about how it's going to reshape global trade patterns because, again, like issues of market concentration is arising, right? Right now, only the largest companies in very specific areas have the financial resources, the technological resources, and the human capital to do this. Economic alliances, I don't think it's going to happen anytime, at least not in the next 2-3 years, which is going to be based on AI-driven economic growth. If anything, people are at least nations are more worried about, at least in the global south, I'm not sure that AI is going to take away jobs, certain jobs in the near future. Right? So we may see that other jobs coming up later, but yeah, so that's what we have.
Great. I'll add something, but later. But yeah, maybe we'll move on to the second point. But before that, Anushka, I think you can add just quickly on what Satya and Bharat said. Maybe something, anything that,
Yeah.
please.
Right. So I'd say that just to very quickly add to the point about leveraging open source model, I think definitely in the Indian context that would be the way to go. And some of our focus is being diverted to that front. We're seeing the government launch innovation challenges vis-a-vis open source models with platforms like Bhashini, and the goal is to develop a practical application, but that can also digitize India's kind of traditional knowledge, customized technologies to enable Romanized keyboards for local languages, so on and so forth, right? And there are also endeavors like Bhashadan to kind of enable crowdsourcing, empower citizens to bridge the digital language divide on their own accord by contributing their language skills in voice translation, data validation, so on and so forth, right? So I think those are some hyper localized measures to kind of, as at least in the Indian context, to both use open source models, but also build platforms that can build on the rich contributions that diverse populations can make. Of course, both Bhashini, Bhashadan, multiple challenges vis-a-vis leveraging of live things like live speech to speech translation, document to text translation. And so I think, yeah, on that accord, I would have to agree with the fact that local contexts would matter for at least those countries where the diversity is just too large, but at the same time, those countries that are actively willing to participate uh, in global AI efforts, right? So these would be these would be steps that they'll have to take before they can actually think of internationalizing a model or borrowing an international model and um, d- building on it on their own.
All right. Yeah, all of them are the great points. But before we move on to a second aspect of the discussion, which we can do that, if Soliman would like to add something up to him, maybe just asking. Like I can add something I wish to, but I just would like to if you.
No, not at the moment. I'm enjoying the conversation, so maybe I will add later in the conversation.
Sure, appreciate it. Yeah, so that's actually interesting. To go ahead with this, it's actually too nascent, obviously, that, and this is something which I mean, Satya gave some interesting examples about delivery apps and other things which could be related, maybe at a transborder level, maybe between West Asian countries and India. That is one way to see, or maybe, I don't know, Southeast Asian countries and India. And that's obviously happening. That's something which is, could be sought through. So yeah, I think that's great. So to take this up forward, let's address another point. Uh, Now, I will leave it to all the specialists if they would like to address the aspects of small and medium-sized economies, because I think that partially, up to some extent, we have addressed that. But maybe we can address that later, maybe at the later part of the discussion, if that's okay with you, all of you. So, so one aspect which could be affecting beyond aspects of, the whole semiconductor economy, which is between Taiwan, Japan, China, US, and now India is literally a nascent player. It's taking time for India. Beyond semiconductor economy, there's one more aspect about labor markets, right? Uh, Now, one thing we know is that when it comes to technology employees and technology freelancers and workers, there's something which, of course, has its own impact and relevance. So, in that aspect, I think we can steer a bit and discuss, what it could be and can AI really have that impact? Now, in general, of course, the market impact of AI is not that huge, but when it comes to the technical maneuverability of employing and making these AI systems workable, there are aspects of R&D which are important for countries, and it's actually hard, despite managing the computing costs, for companies to come up with AI which has a better R&D portfolio per se, because it depends on the nature of the use case. Sometimes it could be a product or a service which is not credible enough. Sometimes it's a garbage in, garbage out problem. You just come up with something and turns out the output is not even surviving beyond 6 months or 12 months. It's not working properly for any business user or even government, right? That reminds me of a very fascinating paper published by I think the UAE Diplomatic Academy by Professor Cornelio Biola, which was about integrating predictive analytics and forms of analytics and AI into consular services. We can discuss that part later, maybe. But maybe, you know, we can add to this about labor patterns, if there are any aspects of change. So maybe Bharat can begin, maybe Soliman can add later. You know.
So on labor and when you're especially talking about the size of economies, I think what matters will be So if you look at there was a recent IMF report on how AI will be able to augment jobs. There are certain jobs where you might have a lot of complementarity in the jobs being performed, and how AI may be able to do specific tasks, maybe not the entire job, but it'll be able to do a lot of tasks which are complementary to those jobs. So you'll see that in higher skilled economies, where there's more knowledge work involved, you'll see that AI will have a lot of complementarity with those kind of jobs. Whereas lower skill jobs, especially those involving physical labor, maneuvering into different spaces, where mobility is involved, those are jobs where AI is still going to take some time to be able to reach that level of capability. So so when you look at how the kind of impact this will have on the job market, you'll see that there are always a lot of comparisons made that new jobs will be created. It's not just that jobs are going to be lost. You've seen it when cars were invented, or you've seen it when the internet was invented, or the printing press was invented, and so on. Right? So, but I think this might be different from those earlier inventions. You'll see a lot of transformation in the nature of the work itself, the kind of capabilities that the skills that people need, those will change, and they'll change at a scale that we might not have been used to. So you will definitely see some reskilling that's required. You'll see some job loss, but you'll see people becoming more productive. So you will maybe see a lot more innovation as well. Um, and there are certain kinds of jobs that will get affected, maybe more than others. So you will have to have maybe say reskilling for at larger for um, large sections of the society, or rethink how education has to be imparted, and so on, right? So that's still a conversation. I mean, that's still something that we'll have to understand, and it might um, be something that you'll need to see how the impact is on the labor market and how countries evolve. But I don't think it's something that you can escape from, because of how interconnected economies are. You will see that you cannot say that I'm not going to allow these kind of jobs to be taken away, because maybe someone else will be able to get a advantage because of being able to adopt those technologies, than if you choose not to do it, right? So you will see these kind of trade-offs happening, and that's something that will be expected to see. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll just build upon that last point that Bharat said. Now, when we make this particular assertion, it's met with a lot of resistance, both from our own side as well, as we try to wrestle with this, because it doesn't seem particularly empathetic, right? But think about it this way again. I'm going back to the geopolitics angle. If you say you're going to insulate a particular type of, let's say, lower skilled, higher volume job, let's say an assembly worker at a particular plant, if there is an AI use case that can maybe augment that or maybe replace some part of that job profile, then of course wages will rise and the demand for labor will go down. However, if let's say we enact a law which says that no, if this kind of job can only be done by a human being or something, what may end up happening is that currently India has a comparative advantage in lower cost labor, which is attractive for, let's say, Foxconn or the electronic companies of the world. So they may want to come set up here, and then there are like network effects. There are again ways in which contractor ecosystems will flourish, etc. There'll be a net higher economic growth for India. Um, but if you enact a law like that, let's say, and you keep prices artificially high, it's a form of protectionism at the end of the day. India will lose that comparative advantage. Now, comparative advantage as an economic concept is not something that is natural most of the time, right? The governments have to build it or sustain it. Now, if, for instance, now currently one of our goals is to become an export-oriented hub, and if you try to do something like this may end up having unintended consequences, and you cannot really like reverse it very quickly if something goes wrong. However, the other part, which is, let's say, like questions of creative output, like occupations that are primarily creative in nature, of course, generative AI is a huge problem for that. And there is no real clear-cut solution to this, because at the end of the day, a lot of knowledge is already out there. And it's very difficult to enforce and it's not in humanity's best interest to continue to keep things in silos. That does not mean that people or graphic artists, musicians should not be compensated for their work. So obviously there needs to be a reconception of, again, property rights, of ownership in an information age. And that is something, again, like we don't have ready answers here, but it has to be a techno-legal solutions at the end of the day. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that right now.
Right, interesting. Anushka, do you like to chime in? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, thanks. I think I'd just like to ping back on one of the points made by Bharat with regards to what we've seen previously in, say, the first, second, and third industrial revolutions, and in all of this, especially when it comes to the labor front, it's important to keep in mind that there's a huge time element attached, right? We've seen in previous industrial revolutions as well that there have been interest groups like the Luddites, for example, who resisted the continued integration of modern technology with the fear that their jobs will be replaced. But the result, as because we have the privilege to go back in history and assess data, the results have always been that the economy has always grown, and there have always been more new jobs net. So I think, and of course, Bharat mentioned the IMF report. There's also a future of jobs report that's published biannually by the World Economic Forum. And as per this report, the integration of automation in most businesses globally, at least of those that have been surveyed, that are surveyed from time to time by this report, the degree of integration of automation has been at a much slower pace than we have anticipated. So we're in a very unique moment in history where we have the opportunity to identify sectors and jobs where there is a need to create, as I said previously, net new opportunities. Of course, Bharat gave numbers from the IMF report, and 40% of jobs are bound to be affected by AI. But like I said, there's a time element to it, and so this is the time when we kind of figure out what are the roles, what are the positions that are going to see an uptick with more integration of AI, more integration of artificial intelligence in businesses, and what are the jobs that will perhaps be that are more highly complementary to the use of AI than perhaps those that work in isolation, right? So high complement jobs, jobs such as those of AI and ML specialists, sustainability specialists, intelligence analysts, even engineers that work on renewable energy and solar energy. These are jobs that are going to see growth. And at the same time, jobs such as those of bank tellers or cashiers or ticket clerks, they're going to become high complementarity jobs. So they're going to see an increased uptake in the use of AI, right? So it's I think on this front, the step one to understand labor impacts of AI on labor would be to see the data from the past and understand that there's going to be growth of economy and growth of net number of jobs, but to also identify jobs that need to see growth, and those perhaps that will be most complementary with integration of AI and ML. Yeah.
Great, interesting. So if Soliman wishes to add, it would be great. I think all points have been added. I'll maybe chime in later, but.
Actually, if this is a very interesting discussion, but few points to highlight here. I think what was discussed here reflect the broader theme of there's going to be divergence over AI and automation, not only on the geopolitical level, but also within the concept, like within the idea of economic growth. Meaning the traditional ways for emerging markets to grow is like what was mentioned: cheap labor, skilled cheap labor, infrastructure, so you're able to do things in a cheaper way than, let's say, the origin country. Let's say the origin country is Britain, Germany, or the United States. If AI, and I think this is going to be the trend, if AI is able to shrink that sort of advantage, limit that sort of advantage, because you're able to use 3D printing to manufacture a car. Well, sounds very unreasonable right now, but this might not be unreasonable in 4 to 5 years. So what does it do to the concept of offshoring, to the concept of outsourcing, and what does it mean in terms of the broader employment models that we have in emerging markets? So I agree with the speakers about the broad, the profound impact on employment. To add some sort of political element to this, in 2020, in the Democratic Party primary elections, we had a candidate, Andrew Yang, who was running on offering universal basic income for people in response to automation. So we're not really that far away, and clearly political leaders are trying to understand how they're going to manage the question of employment loss. And this is not really just an emerging markets thing; it is also a developed nations situation. But clearly, there's diversions on the impact, the ratio, and what does it mean to the broader economic model. Because if you're a service-based economy, you're going to be impacted for sure, but you're not be impacted the same way Vietnam, India, Bangladesh will be impacted. So far, we're still waiting to see if there's going to be a much more proactive policy response and economic response to this near future scenario. And the reason why I don't feel that we're hearing or seeing or reading policy discussions on this is because of the AI deployment is fast, and people are still just trying to grasp this idea of AI revolution and what does it mean. So I think since the wheel is moving so fast, we do not really stop and take a breath and understand what does it do to our society and economy and military capabilities. But I think it will hit us hard. I think this will come the same way when OpenAI released ChatGPT, and we had a wow moment when everyone was like, what's that? What we're dealing with? No one was ready for the question of IP, intellectual property. No one was ready to the question of what does it do to professional services, ChatGPT and professional services. No one was really prepared to the idea of education and ChatGPT. And I think we're going to have similar conversations and similar surprises arising as we see automation being used to replace actual humans producing value and producing products. And on this note, I want to thank you for convening this panel, moderating it. I truly enjoyed the engagement and conversations. Unfortunately, I have to drop off for a different engagement, but you're in safe hand. And please, if you have any questions, please email me on my email is public, or on LinkedIn. Happy to respond to.
All right. Great then. I think we'll connect with you later, and it was great to have you. Okay, so anyways, we'll complete with maybe the last 2 points which were left. And I think what we can do is ponder upon it a bit. And I think that's how we can complete it. Once the recording will stop, I think we'll take a bit feedback, and I think we'll discuss. I think we have some 10 to 15 minutes more to discuss. So there's one aspect which interests, like, so I think aspects of critical infrastructure is something which could be great to discuss. So when we integrate AI in any critical infrastructure, like what Soliman said, and I completely agree with him, people are still grasping about what could be a proper industrially viable use case of AI. It could be any sector. Now, my assessment says that in certain sectors like fintech and banking and others, there are some standardized use cases already happening for 10 years, even before ChatGPT came in. But that's a different thing altogether. But one thing which is all the fourth understandable is that there is actually a need to standardize. But the thing is, of course, while the certainty of a use case is unknown, it could also be a potential risk, maybe from a legal, rightfully, but it would impact diplomatic relations to a limited extent, at least, about integrating any so-called AI use case, which might not be stable for after a period of time, which also happens in the case. And it's not merely hallucination, it could be something beyond hallucination. So you are integrating certain AI tools or certain AI components which you have created, which are custom components. And then it could affect a general critical infrastructure. It could be a private sector problem, it could be a government problem, which depends. Because again, how local governments behave or how state governments behave, that's a critical thing, right? So maybe I think Bharat, you can add up, and then I think Satya and Anushka can add up. What do you think?
I'll let Satya or Anushka go first, and then I'll chip in later.
Sure.
Yeah. Just to be clear about the question, you're asking how generative AI, if it's integrated into critical structure, because other forms of machine learning, deep learning, and computer vision, etc., have already been integrated into critical structure for a long time now. Maybe even more iterative development is happening there, but I don't feel like hallucination is going to be a problem, because
No.
let's define critical infrastructure first of all. Power grids, strategic reserves, let's say, energy. There's also going to be things like defense and etc. And I don't think the question of integrating generative AI is going to be a burning question until, of course, reliability thresholds are reached somewhere, because both in private sector and the government sector, reliability is foremost on their minds. It's not just the novelty of efficiency or maybe getting a new functionality. Reliability in very core thresholds and very core areas is going to be the first thresholds that they need to reach before that's integrating. Well, sorry, what was the second part of the question? I missed it. Aside from critical
So
infrastructure,
largely it was about mainstream AI products, which includes Gen AI, not about basic system infrastructure like it has been. Like you rightly mentioned, things have been already there in certain segments, which I agree. So yeah, it was partly about Gen AI and partly about generally the mainstream AI products, which could or could not be classified as Gen AI. But yeah.
Yeah. So, but so the other thing is, see, integration of AI is going to happen in a piecemeal manner. So they will start off with the least risky ones. Then you have other questions like, are they connected to the internet? Is stuff like that. But then we already crossed that question when Internet of Things came about and embedded technology became commonplace, right? So yeah, I mean, I don't think this is a problem that's going to, I mean, I'm just reading the question, it's going to affect strategic dependence and vulnerabilities. Maybe vulnerability in the sense that the underlying infrastructure, the chips, the systems onboard it may have backdoors that have been inserted at certain point in the supply chain when they're manufacturing components for it. In which case, then you rely on supply chain risk management or ensuring that adversary countries are not part of the supply chain at all, or making sure friend shoring is an alternative. So yeah, so I don't think that is going to be a burning question anytime soon. Yeah, I mean, unless you count, yeah, AI integration of AI or other tools like that in, let's say, lethal autonomous weapon systems. And we are seeing that happen in Israel right now. Again, it's all very blurry about the exact details of the level of integration, the capabilities of the autonomous, the AI system itself that is directing this, whether there's a human in the loop at all. Yeah, so all of these questions, but it's a very specific strategic concern, right? So I don't think it fits into critical infrastructure specifically, but yeah.
Okay, Anushka, would you like to add?
Right. So, I just have a very quick point to make of this, which is about maybe if you classify, um, see, in all of these things, the question really is, are we at that stage? So, vis-a-vis your question on the integration of Gen AI with critical information infrastructure, I think my simple answer to that would be we're very far away from truly realizing the potential applications of generative AI, and of course there's also the challenge of how countries differently define critical information infrastructure. But I guess you could make a case for referring to cloud infrastructure as CII, and then there is some debate on integrating Gen AI with cloud infrastructure, some scope for use of generative adversarial networks, or Gen AI like GPT in providing more reliable services, predictive analytics, and there are phrases thrown around like such an integration can allow cloud infrastructure to function more optimally. But what that optimal functioning is, we will not know until and unless we see a use case. So I think it's really about where we are, and I don't think we're there yet, like I said. And again, like Satya argued, over time, like if you look at semiconductors, for example, it's we can say with certain certainty that IoT or semiconductors, you cannot run CII without um, uh, some of these technologies, right? But I don't think I can say the same for generative AI. So that potential is also very limited in that it's a very specific form of um, um, artificial intelligence software, and very little is there to be achieved in, say, integrating Gen AI with CII. So it would be something much in the future, provided Gen AI achieves that kind of potential, or we recognize which critical information infrastructure, say even cloud computing, how can it use it, quote unquote, use Gen AI, quote unquote, optimally to impact performance, productivity, things like that.
Great. Bharat, I think the floor is yours.
Yeah. I just want to add to what Anushka was just saying. So when you look at criticality or dependence, right? So one way to look at it is to look at some of the building blocks of systems that we're using. Maybe these are different components that we use to build AI systems for ourselves. Compute, for example, might be something like Anushka was mentioning. So if you are dependent on compute from an external source for powering applications that you're using, so that makes you maybe vulnerable, or just running certain sensitive applications which have national security implications. So running these on servers which are not sovereign, for example, those might have certain vulnerabilities. So that's one way of looking at it. In other cases, I still think there will be, you can build in checks and balances when you integrate AI systems. You can ensure that you need to ensure that when these vulnerabilities are addressed. Another more something that you might not think of as critical but might have bigger consequences is how you just these are not perfect tools, and you'll, as we grow to depend on them more and more, you will start relying on the things that AI is, the outputs that AI is generating, just integrating it into different aspects of our life. And they might have their own biases, so which get amplified. They might have their own, you will grow to rely on these imperfect tools, and the flaws of those tools, I think, will have implications for society at a scale which might have certain serious consequences. So that, even though it's not a dependency or vulnerability, I think that's also, given that these technologies will be concentrated in the hands of a few players, they might be instrumental in shaping the regulations around them. So I think that's also a vulnerability in some sense when you are adopting it at this scale. Right? So that's one thing I wanted to add to this.
No, I really appreciate that, and all of them are great points, very rightly put. And yeah, Satya, thanks for sharing the recent link on critical infrastructure and computational issues. Uh, I would have asked a question to Soliman about how is it being perceived in West Asia, but owing to circumstances, we were also not aware of things happened. But anyways, uh, I would have continued with the last question, which was on MSMEs, but I think kind of we have discussed it all already in the beginning on economic and trade factors. I'll skip that one. But to conclude in 2 to 3 minutes, I'd say that the audience has been participating. Thank you. Yeah, we could not get the questions. That's perfectly fine, but we'll connect later. I think this is one of the starter discussions on AI and geopolitics from our end, at least. So we'll take it that way. But yeah, the recording will be out on YouTube very soon, and we'll let you know how it is. For any feedback, you can communicate with us at executive@isail.co.in. We're also available. We also have our Substack called indian.substack.com. And so we'll stay in touch. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. Have a good day.
Yeah.